Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Our topic this week, the German Chancellor's role in the face of rising populism on both sides of the Atlantic. Angela Merkel announced that she will stand for a fourth term. If she wins, she could become the longest-serving chancellor in German post-war history. She and her party can expect a tough campaign. She's under pressure domestically. Abroad, however, some are calling her the indispensable chancellor, the last defender of the free world. Can Germany really shoulder such a burden? With right-wing nationalist populism resurgent, what kind of leadership can be expected from Angela Merkel? That's what we want to talk about today with three guests who follow events here in Germany very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Ulrike Guiraud. She is director of the European Democracy Lab at the European School of Governance in Berlin. She says praising Angela Merkel today as the only remaining leader of the free world makes us quickly forget the enormous responsibility of Germany for the populist crises in Europe. And it's great to have Malte Lehming back with us on the show. He's senior editor and until recently opinion page editor at the Berlin Daily, the Tagesspiegel. And he says, due to Germany's terrible history, Germany's strong pacifistic tradition and its polarizing refugee policy, Angela Merkel can only be a strong international moderator, but not the leader of the free world. And Friedrich Thelen is with us once more. He is head of political consulting firm Thelen Consult, and he's a former parliamentary bureau chief of the business magazine Wirtschaftswoche. And he says Chancellor Angela Merkel's fourth candidacy is a decision for stability in difficult times, but not a signal for reforms or new politics. Ulrike Guiraud, the New York Times, The Guardian, The Economist all described the Chancellor in the last 10 days or so as the last remaining world leader of stature to defend, quote-unquote, the West's liberal values. Is Angela Merkel being touted largely by default because there's nobody else appropriate for this role? Or is there something unique about Germany's position and political culture?
Well, I think there's something unique about herself because she was the first woman. She governed 8 years successfully, third term. So, I mean, she has proven that she can manage power, that she could stay, that she could circumvent crises. So that's all for good. And yes, Germany is an important country. It's a big country. So she has a powerful position also by this. But then the rest is, I think, by default, because there's no strong leader in France, no strong leader in Spain, not even a government in Spain for very long. Brexit or UK in a mess, so to say. Renzi not really strong. So, yes, she is one of the remaining leaders in Europe who survived, basically, the crisis years. And I think that is fueling her, power.
And, of course, Germany itself has survived the crisis years quite well, economically doing a great deal better than pretty much every other member of the EU. Friedrich Thelen, does some of this appeal to Merkel and Germany for leadership simply reflect this country's economic prowess?
Not alone. One has to be fair to give the credit to Gerhard Schröder, who changed the economic system, social system, in a way that he lost his job. Was kicked out of the chancellery. But
significant reforms to the social welfare system.
And that's what we, i.e. Angela Merkel, lives on. It is merits which are not totally hers. She continued the policy, but on the other end, if you look at our old age pension funds, policies which exercise at the moment, they're not very hopeful. But it is a combination. On the one hand, her personality, she is a modest person. She doesn't dominate others, at least not visibly. And she always tries to bring people into contact in conversation, even with most difficult, like Erdogan from Turkey. She continues to hold up a strain of conversation, as well as with Putin. That is something of her reputation. On the other hand, true. The country's well-being and her position there adds up to her international reputation.
Malte Lehming, you said in your opening statement that Germany's historic role as the country that perpetrated the Holocaust essentially bars it from being a leader in terms of Western values. But couldn't you make quite the opposite argument, that it's precisely because of Germany's confrontation with that history that it has developed a culture, a political culture of restraint, of stability, and of great respect and tolerance for diversity and openness, all of which, in fact, do make it a leader?
Correct. I think both readings are correct. I mean, first of all, there is this part of history, and this part of history is not forgotten, for example, in Greece, in the Ukraine, in Russia, in many places, in the Netherlands, in Norway, wherever German soldiers conquered in France, conquered different countries. This kind of past is not forgotten. Sometimes it's more forgotten in Germany than these places. This, first of all, makes it at least a responsibility to be as modest as Angela Merkel is, but to be the leader of the free world. And don't we include in the free world the United States of America, Australia, New Zealand? How can Angela Merkel lead the United States of America? It's just impossible. Just impossible. She not even can lead Europe right now in the state it is. So I've much doubt that she might be the only one left, but the only one left with very little abilities to really change things.
But keep the pudding together.
And the question is not whether she can lead Europe, for instance. The question is whether she should lead Europe. And I think she should not. I think there's a deep problem and concern that first we equal Merkel with Germany. Merkel is not Germany, and the country of 80 million should have different political personnel to basically run the country without her at some point. But second, the replacement by Germany fixes Europe, I think, is just not good for the others. And we have seen in the Brexit discussion, for instance, the last European Council, Bratislava, who did the shuttle diplomacy before the EU Council? It was Angela Merkel who did the shuttle diplomacy. And it should have been Tusk, or it should have been Schulz, or it should have been Juncker, because the EU institutions...
Let's just remind our viewers, those are all names that are not everyday...
The problem right now
various EU Commission and EU leaders in Brussels.
So if we are preparing decisions for the European Union, it should be the personnel of the European Union institutions who do the shuttle diplomacy. This was my point. And I think there's too much basically sublimating Europe by Mrs. Merkel. And I think this is truly not good for Europe.
Let us just take a brief look. I'll come right back to you, Malte Lemming. I'd like to delve in a bit more detail into what we mean by leadership and what areas are being talked about here. But first, because all of you mentioned how modest the Chancellor is, let's look at her own attempt to manage expectations when it comes to her leadership.
I'm honored by all this talk that says everything now depends on me. But at the same time, I find this discussion rather grotesque. No one, not even someone with a huge amount of experience, can change the situation in Germany or in Europe for the better. The German Chancellor certainly can't do it.
So Angela Merkel is saying there no single leader can, in fact, simply turn things around either within Europe or larger or on a larger scale internationally. Let us look at some of the areas that are being mentioned as ones where Germany could exercise some form of leadership. And I'll start out with a very insightful article written by the historian Timothy Garton-Ash. He called on Germany to, quote, preserve the liberal international order, including hard-won agreements on climate change and trade. Friedrich-Thelen, is that really all that far-fetched in terms of a role for Germany? After all, this is one of the world's preeminent trading nations. It has a very strong stake in keeping open international trade. And moreover, Germany has gone way out in front in terms of a major transformation of its energy system, which is intended to make Germany eventually climate neutral. So also a strong stake in climate change treaties.
True. There is a stake in climate change, even if from an economic point of view, you could discuss whether that was the right move, because in an economy that is a well-established traditional role. All processes go on a longer line. They're easier to adapt, but not opening that bottle. But I think Timothy Garton-Ash, whom you quoted, takes the stakes too high. The liberal world, whatever is left, led by the German Chancellor, I don't see any other German politician who can. I don't see any other European. I do not see that one person alone can do it anyway. I think it has to be a common effort where Germany is going to contribute.
The problem right now is the perception in many countries. And the perception is because many countries became much more nationalistic, as we saw with the Brexit in Great Britain, with the election of Donald Trump in the United States, Polish government, the Hungarian government, developments in France, in the Netherlands, wherever. So whatever happens, for example, in Europe, and Merkel is going to lead, will always be perceived as she's following German interests. Because that's right now the narrative. Everything is seen in the world, that the leader who tries to bring in some interest and to keep things together. Let's imagine Marine Le Pen will be president of France. She will, without any doubt, say Merkel just follows German interest, and that's why we have to fight the European Union.
I bring it some point back because, you know, now we are celebrating sort of Merkel as the remaining leader of the world and she's the only sort of strong leader in Europe. Yeah, that's for sure. But the real interesting thing is that before Germany became that sort of leadership function country, we had a dominance feature in the European Union. And the German dominance was not good for Europe. So in a way, Merkel was Saulus before Germany became Paulus. Yeah. And I think this, when we are now talking that we have this threat of right-wing populism, you mentioned Marine Le Pen in France and perhaps Mr. Hofer in Austria and so on and so forth, Kaczynski, Poland, Hungary, then we also need to say that in the years between the banking crisis years, 2010 to 2015 or so, it was pretty much the German dominance in the structures of the European Union which is co-responsible for what we produced in terms of right-wing populism. And so now saying that Merkel is basically the only remaining leader is a little bit irony of history too. So also in the refugee crisis, you know, I mean, there was a huge amount of refugees. I was in favor of this, just to say this. But it was also a German decision to take the refugees. It wasn't consulted on the European level. We did that basically a German decision. And then we are wondering that the other countries are not solidarian and the other countries turn sort of populism against the refugees. So I think there's also consequence and causes. And some of the causes which now make feel that Merkel is the remaining leader were causes for which Germany takes co-responsibility.
Friedrich Thelen, restraint and modesty are all very well, but the fact is, in the face of rising right-wing nationalist populism, do you truly not think that your country needs to get out there and stand up for the values that your constitution and that your rule of law represent?
True, I cannot.
Because I hear all three of you saying, no, this isn't a role for us.
No. The role is not taking on the leadership for all the others, but defend your position, the rule of law, democracy, everything to it, that's okay. But there's some homework to be done first. This country spends 1.2% of its gross national product for defense, even though they have agreed in Europe, and as the British and the French and even the United States, even more, spend 2% of their GDP. And I think that's one point to come back to. Apart from modesty, I think a strong role lies ahead of her in internal politics. She must change politics inside. We're living from the benefits of social democratic change, reform, and from the fact that they live nicely, we spend much less on defense.
Let us come back to domestic politics, but let's stay with that topic of defense, because this is an area, Malte Lemming, where European Union leaders are now scurrying to say, oh, in the wake of Donald Trump's election, we absolutely must do more. And Germany, several, not only Angela Merkel, but also the finance minister, who's been so eager to save money, has said we will go up to that 2% of our GDP on military expenditures. This is something we must do. Do you think German leadership can really count here in the security area?
I don't know if that should be the criteria for German leadership. If you spend 1.2, 1.4 or 1.6% of your GDP for defense measures, this is not, I mean, this is not defined, this is not the defining moment for leadership. And you're right. Merkel is by far the most experienced leader in world affairs concerning the liberal, the free world, as we say it. 11 years is quite a lot. She knows every agreement by heart. She is very, very knowledgeable, and she's the one who should take over the role. Maybe I didn't put that much clearly enough. She is in the position to defend the free world. but there are a lot of limits. She can't play this card quite a lot. But there is no one else. So and she for sure should claim the values, the Western values, the right of law, the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all these things. And she made it very clearly. After Donald Trump was elected, by writing this little note, yes, I will work with you together on the basis of this and this and this. And then she mentioned all the values she's going to defend.
May I just on one point, I didn't define the leadership role on the fact how much money we spend. But if you want to be a leading person in foreign policy, in a Western Union or Western world combination, you have to come up with the same amount of expenses as the others.
But it's not the
Baltic
point.
States,
It's not,
Baltic states are playing more than 2%. No one of them is leading the free world.
Yeah,
No,
but
I didn't say that.
So you don't have to meet these expectations to be a leader of the
Okay,
But
and let me give the floor to Ulrike Guerreau. Two issues open here, Ulrike Guerreau. Perhaps you would comment briefly on both. The first one, security. There's an idea that Donald Trump may, to some degree, if not entirely, reduce the U.S. role in NATO. Hence, the great interest in the EU to increase European countries' cooperation on security issues. Is there a leadership role there for the Chancellor? And number two, values.
So, yes, there is a leadership role for the Chancellor and for Germany in this security business, obviously. But the other thing is, how can it work? And if it only works that we side with the French, for instance, because there's now a Franco-German paper on defense. Not that I don't like this. I like this. This is always the Franco-German engine. But don't forget Poland. For instance, take the Minsk agreements. We do a Franco-German cooperation on Minsk agreements. We don't ask the Poles, although we talk about the Weimar Triangle. The Poles don't feel happy if you decide something on Ukraine in a Franco-German setting. So the leadership also comes as a disguise that there is always sort of Germany decides with whom she talks to, and this is not good. So if we are talking security, then we need to talk about European security, and then it cannot come in the sort of classical formation of Franco-German settings or so. And I think that's the first point. The second about values. On values, I'm very fine to hear Germany, we will defend the rule of law, what Mr. Thelen said. All this is fine. Obviously, I agree. But you also need then to do politics which are basically suiting people. And this is not only, this is also at the origin of European right-wing populism is also a dramatic mismanagement of the euro crisis and the consequences of the euro crisis. And there has been austerity policy. Austerity policy was not good for Portugal, for Spain, for Greece, and so on and so forth, was not good for France. So now to complain that we have this right-wing populism and say, oh, Mrs. Merkel needs to assure the values, could have also saying, could we have done a better policy on the euro mismanagement? Perhaps we wouldn't have to deal with the right-wing populism and we would not need to celebrate Merkel as the only remaining leader. You know, that's the circle I would like to...
Friedrich Thelen, may I just ask you also on this subject of values? As mentioned by Malte Lehming, when the Chancellor congratulated Donald Trump on his victory, she did so with a statement that essentially laid out the democratic values on the basis of which that cooperation could occur. Yeah. Some people said that was an absolute diplomatic, masterly stroke to essentially define the parameters and remind him of important values. Others says it's absolutely condescending. What do you say?
I think defense of her position in Germany, if she congratulates the new president of the United States elect, and there is a lot of, critique of Mr. Trump, she then follows what she has to do as a Western leader, as it does in the international world. She congratulates and puts a little bracket around it. I only congratulate if you do these politics. That's the self-defense in Germany or Europe. And with being unpolite and without being non-diplomatic.
And let us
brilliantly. I mean, she played the role brilliantly. There was a brilliant thing to do. So.
I didn't deny she played it.
And let us not forget how very closely she worked with Donald Trump's predecessor, the still President Barack Obama. In fact, he was here in Berlin after the election and had this to say about the Chancellor.
If I were here and I were German and I had a vote, I might support him.
So he says, Ulrike Giraud, that he would vote for her if he were a German, but he then went on to say, however, I'm not sure if it would hurt or help her. The implication being, of course, that praise from abroad might not do her any good here at home. What do you think, Angela Merkel, in the face of right-wing populism here in Germany, how strong are her chances that she actually can win the next election at the head of the CDU?
I think the elections are quite open. I think that we are not even sure which coalition she might prefer. There's talk about, black-green coalition. There's talk about grand coalition. There's a lot of possibilities. I think the German elections will largely depend on a very busy election year. Between now and the German elections, there's first Austrian elections with possibly a right-wing push in Austria. There's an Italian referendum, which is not a tiny thing, and it's a question about recapitalization of Italian banks. There's a Dutch election. There's a very important French election. And I think all these results altogether will impact on how the situation will be in next fall when Germany will vote. So can she win or not will largely depend on what happens between. And I wouldn't say, I don't have a crystal ball here, but if things go wrong, say, in France, and against my conviction, Marine Le Pen should win for whatever reason, because today everything comes at a surprise. Trump could win, Brexit could happen, although we thought it could never happen. So we don't know. And if there's that push and it continues that we have this wave of right-wing populism, I wouldn't exclude that we have a high score of the so-called Alternative for Germany, 20, 24%, 25%, and then it changes basically the balance here in the party system.
Martin Lemming, one reason for Hillary Clinton's lack of popularity was the perception that she was an absolute fixture on the political stream as a member of the mainstream political elite, basically for decades. Couldn't one make the same argument about the Chancellor? Couldn't that work to her detriment?
There are some similarities, I would agree there. But what I would add, the development until the next election is you have something new now in world politics. This is, we had, when the GDR still was existing, there was the phrase, the real existing socialism. It's not socialism as we dream about, but the real existing one, with the Gulag, with the wall and everything else. Now we have the real existing populism, with Donald Trump and the Brexit in Great Britain. So, and the mess this is going to create will work as a deterrent, as I hope, to many, many people. And maybe the simple message, either you vote for this kind of chaos, populist chaos that you see in the United States and Great Britain, or for some simple things like stability and continuity. What is your choice?
Deterrence doesn't work. I mean, we have all around
we never have the situation.
We have Kaczynski. I mean, deterrence doesn't work.
The big deterrence is Great Britain, and many Britons are regretting their voice for Brexit. The next deterrent is United States. You can't compare the United States with Hungary or Poland. So this example and what happens in the United States will, that's my prediction, will surely be a kind of deterrent.
Friedrich Thelen, do you think that Germany is, in at least some degree, immune to the kind of anti-elitism sweeping the rest of Europe, perhaps in part because of that historical experience?
I wouldn't exclude that, especially to the right wing. There are, 12 years, those from 1933 to 1945, which are an exclusion to this. I mean, there might be, and I think it's too easy to say they're all right-wing, they're whatever, maybe 10%, 12%. But that doesn't change the outcome. The CDU, and nobody will deny it here, will be the strongest party in any case.
The Chancellor's
and
party.
The Chancellor's party will be the strongest. Then she sort of calmed her internal obstacle. Horst Seehofer, the leader of the CSU, the southern wing of the CDU, he is with her. So she is in a position to choose. And my personal conviction is it will end up, whatever happens around, in a great coalition, because the stronger the threats from the outside are, the more people in here vote to say, let's stick to what we have, stability, don't fuddle around. And even the SPD going into a coalition bed together with the ex-communist, i.e. Die Linke, who part of them do not want to be member of NATO, part of them object EU policies. The SPD is not going with this partner into bed.
And the head of the Linke had some very strong praise yesterday for Donald Trump, astonishingly enough. Let me just ask, because we're almost at the end of our time, Ulrike Gero, whether you would agree with that. We do, in fact, see a new trend toward very hard right-wing media. Breitbart, the website that in many ways helped generate much of the support for Donald Trump, now saying it's going to open a website here in Germany in time for the election. Could that change the calculus? Older Germans remember the dangers of right-wing populism, but how about younger ones?
And we have Reichsbürger and we have citizens who do not respect the order of the Bundesrepublik. So I think the gates in Germany towards right-wing populism opened lately, but they are also opening. The other countries came first, but I think there's no barrage in Germany, and I think there's a trend, and we need to be very careful also in this country.
So, for all of you, very quick last question. Fourth term for Angela Merkel as a bulwark of democracy, yes or no?
Yes.
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 Okay, consensus all along the line. Many thanks to all of you for being with us, and many thanks to you out there for tuning in.
I should
See
have
you
said.
soon.